next speaker is Michael Deheneffe. He's Innovative Scouts Consulting Director for Business and Decision in Belgium, and he's working as a very loyal employee for 14 years now for BN. Please.
Thank you. So difficult to go after two fantastic speakers, Mark and Peter, and I will try to do some links to the presentation. The first, I will try to answer the question, will digital transformation squeeze your business, the topic of today. And the first thing, some inspiration maybe, is not the first revolution we have to face. We have the steam, electronic, internet, IoT, and so on. And finally, what's a revolution? It's like a real revolution. Everything changes, but in fact nothing changes. Sometimes we have some bubbles, and we can see no difference between the two. It's a picture on the screen. I'm a collector of old books about science. I have a book here from 1850, and it's about 100 innovation, about the pile of Volta, the gas lightning, the electricity, and so on. It's fantastic because they question exactly the same question than now. What will change? Which jobs will disappear? Or to prepare to the children, and so on. It's 170 years old. And I read it every month because it's a use of inspiration. I have a lot of books like that. So it's not the first time we have discussion. And every revolution brings some new stuff and new habits, new usage, and so on. Before, in the companies, it was a time for planification. It was a time for mass production, mass media, mass advertising, and everything was predictable, was plannable, and everything was planned. Now, it's more difficult, because the customers have access to a lot of information, device, tools, customer advice, opinions, informations. And they decide themselves about the journey. They design themselves the journey. So the world is changing, the world is accelerating, and more than that, the center of gravity is changing. Because remember, maybe 15 years ago, you receive from your company a BlackBerry, a laptop, you would never at home, and the companies were educating their employees. Now it's exactly the contrary. You bring your own iPad at the office, and it's more easy to find information in the world than in your company. I have not the time right now, but if I had the time, I can ask you maybe the birthday date of the economy, Japanese Ministry of Economy, and you will find it in 30 to 40 seconds. Because of Wikipedia, Google, and so on, maybe 5 words, 10 clicks, and you have the information. If I ask you, the turnover of your best clients this month, for the 1st of November to today, it will take minutes, hours, days, and for some of them, maybe you have to wait end of the month. It's your client, the best one, in your company, with your tools. So it's strange because we are more equipped in our personal life than in the company life. Without any investment, just an iPad and Google. So all this information is available to the companies too. Okay. How to transform this huge amount of information into value for the companies. And I'm pretty sure that the company has to be and to react exactly like the living being. And I will make the jump with your presentation later. I'll take a brain. How to build a brain in the company. And which functionality, which feature of the brain is squeezable and which is not. First thing, we have to capture a lot of data. In a living being, it's the sense. I collect information. For the company, it's easier and easier to capture some data from the IoT, the capture, the ETL, and so on. You can capture a lot of amount of data. It's pretty much squeezable. The second one is the memory. To store information is easy. But to clean information, organize information, cross information is quite difficult. Maybe you need some human resources to help the computer to store information. To compute information. So since IBM Big Blue, the computer is better than the human for games, for closed game. But how to analyze data and find relation between different things is quite complex. You need human resources to do that. The conscience, the way to manage information, the governance, the good usage, and so on, and some new jobs appear in this area. The learning, the ability to learn, to improve, to analyze your failure and your success. The action, how to interact with the world, how to interrupt the process, to change the process, to adapt the process. You need creativity for that. So the creativity is the last one. You need imagination, discovery, sense of adventure, find new things and so on. And finally, if you orchestrate all these 7 areas, some of them are squeezable, some of them are not. And what's the difference between a living being and just a dead thing, like a stone? It's the motivation, the desire to live, to survive, to evolve, to achieve. And how to do that for a company? You have 4 different ways to improve yourselves. If you take the brain, you can use all this revolution to do your business but better. You can use your business to do more business. You can create a new type of business, and you can do your business but with less risk, so wild business. And I will give, for example, one for each of the axes. The first one, and it's all the 4 companies we had in the last months or years. The first one is Nespresso. Nespresso is not really a coffee company. It's a data company, an information company. The fact that they know that 80% of the turnover is linked to specific persons, it's rare on the retail industry. Coca-Cola don't know its customers. Unilever don't know its final consumers. Nespresso did. And with this information, they know your taste, your habits, your behavior rupture, your behavior in the coffee and so on, and they can create new services to propose to you some additional services, additional products and so on, to send you the right message at the right time in the right channel because they know you perfectly. So they transform this customer insight, this customer intimacy, this customer knowledge into value for them to do more of Nespresso, more business. The second one is fantastic, and I will break some magic today. We helped Disney to manage the customer information. And it's a very classical CRM and so on. Nothing really sexy for today. But in the park, in Euro Disney, they measure the duration of each queue in a different attraction. With this information, they collect, they centralize it, and they display it into big panel like that in the park, and they feed an app with the length of the duration of the different attraction. So a very classical way to display the information. But they analyze in real time the density in the park. And when the density is not optimal, they will try to balance the density in the park. How do they do that? If the north of the park has the lowest density than the south, they will bring some characters of Disney. Give me Mickey, come here. Go from the south to the north, and by walking, you will bring some family behind you, and bring some people from the south to the north of the park. Lead some girls to the west? No problem. Cinderella from the east to the west. And they balance the density in the park just by the characters of Disney walking into the parks. It's a magic. It's science. Just by measuring the duration of the queue. So it's not rocket science. It's just create a way to use information to optimize the business. So with the same number of attractions, they can provide a better experience for their visitors. Just by managing the information correctly and find a way to interact with the world. The third one is I like this one because it's a white-cross company. When you go to a white-cross company to help them to use the digital transformation, it's difficult. Because normally, some white-cross you can sell 2 or 3 by vehicles. It's difficult to provide better white-cross and so on. So we reflect a lot. And we propose to them to equip the high-level white-cross, so for trains, planes, boats, coaches, trucks by a little GPS chip. And what are we doing with the chip? The fact that exactly now and exactly here it's raining, it has some value. And if you collect all the wipers, all the professional wipers, you can exactly design the clouds and the raining with the precision of the meter and the seconds. And it has a huge value for agriculture, for insurance, for states, for a lot of people are interested by this information. So individually, the value is nothing. But if you collect all the different wipers, it gives you a big advantage in the market. So you can create new business. Before there was just a wipers company, now it's become an information company. We help also exactly with the same way to overcome the digital transformation. We help Pirelli Michelin to equip the tires with some captors to provide personalized advice for the drivers, and for the trucks it can give a savings of €1,000 per year per truck. So the value is 10 times bigger than the price of the captors. And finally, and I like this one too, in the world, in the health world, how to detect an epidemic. Normally some people feel sick, go to the doctors. When the first doctors detect that so many people come with the same symptoms, they will refer to their authority, the health authority, local authority, and by aggregation they will decide that above a threshold there is an epidemic. But before to go to the doctors, a lot of people go to Google and they Google their symptoms, age and so on. And the number of search by keywords, by geography, and by unit of time, it's an available information from Google. So we are able to detect the epidemic before the epidemic. And we can help the Red Cross, we can help some companies to provide the right number of vaccines at the right place before the epidemic. To send the right number of medicines, the right amount of doctors to be ready for the epidemic before the official detection of the epidemic. So these four examples are very different. But all of these four companies use exactly the same way to manage and the same 5 keys to succeed. The first one is the needs for short cycles. It's not a 5 years plan, just a month ID, to test ID, to by iteration, to correct and so on. The obsession of measurement. They have to measure everything. If you want to improve a situation, you have to measure the situation. Empowering teams. You have to give the right to the people to test new things. You have to give to the people time to test something. To give them resources to test things. The right to fail. For the 4 examples I gave, it's maybe the 10th ideas. 9 of them before were failures. They just learned on the failure to imagine the right one. And the close collaboration between all the business lines. The fact that you have in the same room, I don't know, a jurist and a marketing guy, or a financial controller with a commercial. It's fantastic because the idea will be confronted and a third idea will come, and it's a nice way to create innovation. So the 5 keys together, you can name it whatever you want. You can name it a lab, a startup, whatever. Give to a team resources, timing, a budget, but without a detailed budget plan, to test idea, to propose new things, to learn and to create a startup in your organization. So put a brain in your organization and make your organization alive to be ready for the digital transformation. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Here we go to the chief levels, CEOs, CDOs, and the CIOs. And my pleasure to bring Ludo van der Velde on stage. He's the general manager of Elisio, and Elisio is specialized in wind energy parks. Ludo always combined finance with IT, which was for the suppliers not always a very pleasant thing. But he worked at Monsanto, but he's a car lover. Went to Mercedes-Benz and later for a long time at Toyota Motor Europe, where he was a senior vice president for about 13 years, right? Also at Umicore, he combined both functions of finance and IT. And since 3 years, he's at Alain, where digitalisation, of course, in the energy sector really must be hard enough. Please, Ludo.
Thank you. In the meantime, I've changed my looks. Goes with the business. You're in energy. What is it? Well, the question you have to ask is, can you have a digital disruption in energy? Because it's massive. Quite some components that you need to look at first. What is the energy sector? And where can, in that sector, some disruption take place? Let me quickly go with you through it, because I don't know whether you're familiar with the energy sector. I was not 3 years ago, I can assure you. You have basically the whole production side. You have the connection of what you produce with your consumers or your end customers. And on the production side, you typically have the big central units like nuclear power plants or like coal or gas plants where you create electricity. But you have also the decentralized electricity possibility, which is linked to primarily wind energy here in our country. And then the grid is basically here a very simple grid. It's a medium voltage grid, I would say. But you have the high voltage grid, for which you might be familiar with the name of Elia. That exploits how that business is going from the production side to the users. In that grid, you also have the famous intercommunal. Right? Some of them very famous, amongst others, my shareholder. And then users being industry, trade, administration. You have to figure out, they represent about 80% of the use of the production of electricity in this country. I'll come back to that later. And then retail is basically your private homes. Where are we active? We are active in, as a small company, in the renewable energy, primarily based on wind, and we are subject to an enormous part of legislation and regulation in the whole sector. In fact, when I received the question, digital disruption, is that going to affect your business? I said, oh, I'm daily affected by changes in regulation and in legislation. That's more important for me to keep track on, because that's where things are happening that have an immediate impact on my bottom line or on my teams and how I have to engage them for the future. We are, as a company, a very small team, 60 people, based in Ostend, developing, financing, building, operating wind parks, and we sell the green energy. Right? So that is basically what we do. Green energy, that means that you need support. You cannot today survive if you do not have a support system. The price, just to give you an indication of the gray electricity, so that's what you normally can buy on the market, was in the beginning of the year around 32, 33. Last week we closed contracts for the fourth quarter, so forwards at 53. At 53 we cannot survive. We need, in this type of business, we need more in order to survive. Basically, and I come back to that later, also the manufacturers of energy like Engie with nuclear power plants would not be able to survive on a 53. If they would have to build a new plant today. So in each of these activities, there is a potential for disruption. But we are faced, as I mentioned before, primarily by regulation, and that regulation is becoming even more stringent. If you look at the renewable energy targets that we have in Europe for 2030 and what needs to be done there in terms of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of additional renewable energy, in terms of increased energy efficiency. All of that requires a clear new governance system and indicators. And Belgium is today working on the federal level at designing how that roadmap should look like in order to achieve the 2030 commitments that were given in Paris. And they will increase. Well, today, from a promise of 13, we need to go to 18% in terms of renewable energy in the final consumption. Just to give you a bit of feeling for figures, if you talk about the energy sector, it's incredibly capital intensive. Right? For example, a nuclear power plant, and I'm talking about the recent one, which is Hinkley Point in the UK, which is the one that we use as reference. Well, that will cost about almost 27 billion euro. Right? It will operate for 40 years. So if you make then an easy calculation, it's 4.1 million per megawatt, because it's a 3,200 megawatt capacity. If you compare that to offshore wind today, so and I'm using the figures from earlier this year, so not the ones that were announced after that Borsele was announced. Borsele is the most recent tender that was communicated in Holland. If you look at the parks in the beginning of the year, well, we were talking to 370 megawatt at 1.1 billion euro, right? And that represents about roughly 3 million per megawatt. For similar levels of megawatt, meaning 3,700 full out hours is technical detail, but it means that you have during 3,700 hours the turbines making maximum capacity use of the turbine. And you have a 20-year support system. But here you have still the cost of the fuel. Here you have no cost of fuel. So already today, and even with the latest pricings that were done in the UK for the offshore, we see that renewable energy is becoming less expensive and hence more attractive than starting to invest in new nuclear power plants. However, if you would think in extremes, then bizarre things will happen. And I'll come back to that later. Come back to that later when we talk about what does that require and what is the game changer here for us, which is more important than digital at this stage. What is the game changer when you take nuclear out? In fact, you need to look at consumption that we have in Belgium, and these are figures only for Belgium that I use. Yeah, we are talking about terawatt hours, roughly 81,000, and it's a pretty stable image that we have over time. However, production is going out, and mainly here we're at 66,000, at 66 terawatt hours, primarily because we have less productivity in all type of production equipment. Means that already since 2013 period we see an increase in imports. We need to be connected to France primarily, to Holland, Germany, in the future also to the UK, in order to safeguard that we have enough electricity and not a meltdown here in Belgium. And then the funny thing is, yeah, you can say, well, we are going in 2025 to shut down the nuclear power plants in Belgium. Basically, we need to compensate it by importing, and if we then need to compensate by importing, where do we get it? Most likely from France, and there it is primarily nuclear energy. So it's a tough story. If you look at the energy portfolio that we have today, then you see that nuclear is still very dominant, even though we see an increase in the renewable, and there is still potential for wind onshore, and there is still potential for solar onshore. And the best market today is the Brussels market, because there you get the highest premiums on top of the grey electricity price. But there is a need to think about what is going to happen with this huge chunk of nuclear that is there if we want to get it out by 2025. Now, a lot of people think that that in the energy sector that well, that's very expensive, right? All these renewable energy projects, it's costing a lot of money. Basically, it's not. Basically, if you look at the total cost of energy on your yearly electricity bill, then you're talking about 38%. And it is all other components, like taxes, like distribution costs, etc., that have significantly increased over the last couple of years, making that you're up to 62% there of your total bill that you spend for something that is not really electricity. It's to get the electricity. There's quite a lot of taxes in it. Also, the famous turtle tax for those living in Flanders was in there, right? And if that reduces, well, then you will see compensation, because on the other hand, your energy price goes up, so in the end, you will still pay the same. Right? Now, when you know that business, then you ask yourself, where is there an opportunity for a game changer? Because change is always good. Change is something that gives you an opportunity. And I looked also at the question of digital disruption more from a perspective, what is the game changer in there? What can we use? Well, here is an example where you can use it, and where I called it also artificial intelligence. You can write it down on my CV. But basically here it is about what happens during a day. If you look at what the pattern is of volumes during the day and the price movements that you have during the day, you have an opportunity to improve if you know it and if you play the market, and you need to play the market with digital equipment, otherwise it doesn't work, because it's so fast, it's so massive of amounts of information that you need to work through. To do savings up to 40%. Provided you combine it again with technology, because you need, of course, to see a way of battery and storage. Right? It's not like I'm just playing the market, which is also possible. Then it's basically like being a stockbroker. Right? Everybody can do that. But you can play more efficiently if you combine it with battery storage, and if you know the data, have the data to get up to 40% savings. So the question is, disruption of what? If you see that the total delivered capacity in Belgium is about 80 terawatt-hours, then you can roughly assume, although there are no clear figures officially available for it, so I made a rough calculation based on what I knew of the sector, that it is a sector about 23 billion euro in size. The energy suppliers, so those who have nuclear power plants and ourselves, represent roughly 30% of it, so let's say 7 billion. The distribution, that is basically all the intercommunal within Belgium, right? They get 8, which is huge. Well, if you look at it from a perspective, it's relatively good. Transmission, that's more the area business, that's the high voltage and the medium voltage, it's region. And then you have the Belgian state that takes duties and value-added taxes on it, which is another 6. So from the whole portfolio, is quite a lot of it that is used for state refunding. If you see that, they say, yeah, where is the disruption taking place? Because and where can it happen? And what will happen? If I look at the energy suppliers today, they barely make a profit. It's really very difficult for them. One hand, because they have low grade energy prices, so they have not so much margin on which they can play. And on top of that, a lot of that is linked to the evolution of the markets and the tendencies of how the winter will be and the forecast, etc. So there is not much that they can do there. And they see an erosion there, because more and more customers are switching. Now, consumer behavior makes that they move to other customers more quickly. The switch is so easy. The data is available. Everybody makes it a consumer so easy to switch that they switch more often, and hence it pushes further on the margins. Most of the traditional energy suppliers, so there where you sign your contract with, Eneco, Lampiris, Engie, EDF, they all have relatively high historical costs. They also are highly supported by their comité paritaire, which makes it not that easy either for them to get rid of. They all have to undergo the burn of social and unpaid contracts, which is an obligation that is pushed upon them by the legislator, which makes it very difficult for them to really make a profit. And this is rather something impressive on their total balance sheet or P&Ls. And they undergo very frequent modifications in legislation, which requires them to react. And on top of it, it's different by region. So as it is different by region, they lose out on economies of scale if they want to choose. So, is there a difference of things that can happen? By what can disruption further happen? In Belgium, if you look at electricity supply and demand, it goes about the total evolution of the Belgian-based production and the forecast that we have on there. And in my opinion, we are becoming more and more dependent on importing. So we can expect some disruption, because if for one or another reason France starts to prioritize its own markets, well, then we are really a bit in a problem, because we heavily depend on this interconnect line today. There is a very disruptive factor linked to electrical vehicles. I'll come back to that later with an example, but electrical vehicles will have a severe impact on the whole supply and demand situation. We have the nuclear exit that I already mentioned, 2025. And we talk about input, but we do not know yet with firm contracts where our buffer capacity is. We then have a disruption that comes from smart meters. If you have a smart meter, that makes that you also have a high volatility in customer behavior that can occur. And if you combine it then with microgrids, smart grids, and storage, all of a sudden, for the traditional providers of electricity, you have a new world. Right? You have a new world, because all of a sudden, a community can decide that they install a microgrid. On top of that, they make it smart, because today quite a lot of tools are available that you can use to have the intelligence and the full data and the knowledge and consumption, etc., and compensation. And you then combine that with storage, namely with cheap batteries, based on, for example, lithium iron phosphate, and it's a game changer. And then you have the disruption by what I would call the new platform entrants. Already today in the States, Amazon and Google are selling electricity. Why would they not do that here? They have a full customer profile and a full customer knowledge. So why would they not, through that platform and through their presence, offer the contracts also here? What are the reasons that is most likely protection for our colleagues in the electricity supply and demand sector is that regulation changes so frequently, right? And then on top of it is for very small markets in Belgium. So that might be a protective factor. But basically they can do it. They can do it, and they do it already, and they have the knowledge how to do it. So legislation, regulation, I mentioned that is one of the items that is playing a role there, the frequent changes. Also the support mechanisms. If you can do it cheaper, you should do it cheaper. Just to give you an indication, offshore contracts in 2016 were discussed at 130 euro per megawatt hour. LCOE, which means leverage cost of energy. They are now down in recent discussions in the bracket between 80 and 65. It's a significant decrease, right? Partly because the capex can be done cheaper, but partly also because everybody tries to find out ways on how to minimize the profit that the developers can take. Nuclear energy is at 102 today, based on the latest report that I saw for Hinkley Point in the United Kingdom. So if you would build a new nuclear power plant in Belgium, it would be most likely a factor of 2.5 to 2.6. So also NIMBY is an issue, escalation for obtaining permits, European directives. I talked about COP21, and then very, very often what also plays disruption is political courage or the lack of political courage. And I mentioned already consumer consciousness as being one of the factors that disrupts the whole thing. Now you can leverage digital, or you can look at digital disruption. Leveraging digital is what we do when we do developments of projects where we use a lot of technology. We use it also in the production in order to have preventive maintenance. And we do it in supply and demand management as far as we can, where we use then also a lot of database information. Digital disruption, in fact, in our sector took place already several times and over a certain period with mobile communication, meaning all of a sudden you have IP addresses on each of the windmills, right, of each of the towers. The use of big data, the use of networks, and security. But so real-time data mining is one of the topics that we are really into. If you ask for digital disruption, well, clearly the fact that traditional suppliers will face these consumers and new operators will change the game. There is a risk also for the distributor operators that through the existence of or the creation of micro and smart grids in combination with storage, that you no longer need the intercommunal, right? Because you cannot do it in a closed circuit. There's an opportunity for new platform players, as I mentioned before, and there is, on the other hand, also a positive opportunity that is emerging for the network grid operators with LED. LED-based Wi-Fi. Namely, today you have only Wi-Fi as being a transporter of data. There are already examples existing of light being used for transporting information. And clearly this is becoming one of the interesting opportunities for the future, where, take the example of Flanders, they will install LED lighting along all streets. Well, basically it's a gigantic network opportunity that you have, right? With technology still evolving. But also LED in the house is an extremely interesting thing, because LED in your house gives you all of a sudden a totally secured local network where nobody outside, because it's stopped by the walls, you only work by light, outside can go into your own network based on that LED technology. So clearly something interesting. There is an opportunity for blockchain. And this specifically in relation to the emergence of smart grids, whereby you can all of a sudden trigger a direct relation between he who produces electricity and he who takes it. So you are no longer really dependent on the engines of EDF Luminous in order to have a contract. You make your contracts directly with the producer of the energy. And that is certainly something where, in a world where price setting and knowledge of the data plays a role, it will come out more frequently. I see it a bit more long term, but it might happen. I talked about electricity for the electrical vehicles, as you mentioned, I was 24 years in automotive, so I always reflect back on what I have as an automotive background. And I did a simple calculation. If you assume that there are 250 million cars in Western Europe, and you would look at all of these cars would drive pure electricity, right? So not like now hybrids and etc., pure electricity. Then there would be a consumption of about 2.6 terawatt hours per day. If you look at what you then require to cover that, you would need 34 additional nuclear power plants. Right? Or if you transform that in the number of wind turbines based on the assumption that you have a wind turbine of about 2 megawatts, then you would need 54,000 wind turbines. Now, that is in a very simple calculation, but everybody will do the loading at the same time, right? Namely when they are not in the office or when they are asleep. So it means that you're talking about peak capacity that you need to cover. Then you're talking about approximately in Europe 100 extra nuclear power plants that you need to put on the street. There are 160,000 wind turbines just to make the world drive, or Europe drive electric. And next to that, you also need, of course, to invest in your grid reinforcement costs. So the ticket for that is huge. I don't say it's impossible. I just say it's huge, and we still need a lot of technological progress and a lot of digital improvement in that whole picture in order to make that happen. So that was my story. Thank you for your attention.